The ancient relative of humans, Homo erectus, first arrived in present-day China 1.7 million years ago, but was replaced by the more dominant Homo sapiens when they arrived to the area in 120,000 BC. The oldest forms of Chinese culture began in 8000 BC along the banks of the Yangtze River, where rice began to first be cultivated. More permanent agriculture-based settlements popped up around 7000 BC along the Yellow River to the north, where those cultures grew millet, a cereal crop. The basin that forms between the Yangtze and Yellow Rivers became the hearth of Chinese culture and served as the origin for many other East Asian cultures. These origins begin with the mythical creation story of the three sovereigns and five emperors. The story goes that Pangu was an all-powerful god who was encapsulated in a lone egg out in space. When he decided to emerge from the egg, the power was so great a big bang occurred and the universe was formed. The chaotic event created Earth along with a single female being named Huasu, who discovered upon her gaining consciousness that she was pregnant with twins, a brother and sister named Fuxi and Nuwa, who would be the first two of the three sovereigns who acted as demigods. Fuxi and Nuwa would marry and have children beginning humanity, and they taught their offspring, the humans, how to hunt, fish, domesticate pigs, and write using Chinese symbols. Their first child, Shenong, would possess the same deity powers as his parents and go on to become the third sovereign. Shenong was human-like, but would play the monumental role of introducing agriculture to the Chinese people, including the first cultivation of marijuana, which would be used as a religious drug, forming the basis of the traditional Chinese religion of Taoism. He is also credited with introducing the Chinese calendar and money system. After these major contributions, Shenong would spend the rest of his human life by eating various plants to test the level of poisonous and experimenting to see what plants would counter as an antidote, serving as the beginning of Chinese traditional medicine. Shenong would die from an especially poisonous plant, which was said to have ruptured his intestines. Shenong would be revered for his sacrifices to the Chinese people, and his mortal son would ride off his popularity to first unite the Chinese people as the Yellow Emperor, being the first of the five legendary emperors. Under the Yellow Emperor's reign, the compass was invented, and the foundations of a dominant Chinese culture began. The Yellow Emperor had a son named Xiaohao, who was expected to succeed him upon his death. This did not occur, however, as a group of citizens came together and instead democratically chose the Yellow Emperor's grandson, Zhuan Shu, to succeed him to help dissuade a hereditary monarchy beginning, the revered practice known as the abdication system. During Xuanzu's reign as second emperor, an evil spirit named Gongong came to China, which probably represented a series of major natural disasters. Xuanzu is credited with defeating Guangguang and returning peace to China. Upon Xuanzhu's death, the abdication system continued, and he was followed by Emperor Ku, who was credited with bringing music to China by creating various instruments. Upon Ku's death, a power struggle ensued between his sons Ji and Yao, with Yao coming out on top and crowning himself as the fourth emperor. Emperor Yao's reign would be marred by constant devastating floods, which limited his ability to govern. He put in charge a local leader named Gun, who had a plan to stop the flooding by building a series of dikes. The dikes would unfortunately collapse and fail, however, causing widespread death. Feeling helpless, Yao would return to the abdication system, appointing Shun as emperor, who he was not related to. Shun was an effective leader who first organized China as an entity by creating 12 provinces. He also provided justice to the people by imprisoning and executing Gun for his engineering failure. Shun was the last of the five mythical emperors, and he showed mercy to Gun's son Yu by giving him the opportunity to try and stop the flooding. Instead of using his father's failed strategy of constructing dikes, Yu instead went around organizing various villages to begin with the digging of a vast system of canals which would divert the water. The plan worked, and Yu became a hero known as Yu the Great. Following Shun's reign, he would pass the throne on to Yu, establishing the first Chinese dynasty, the Xia dynasty, in 2070 BC. Following his death, Yu would appoint his son Qi as emperor, beginning a hereditary system of monarchy. He was followed by his son Tai Kang, who was followed by his brother Zhang Kang, who was followed by his son Xiang, who was followed by his son Shao Kang, who was followed by his son Zhu, who was followed by his son Huai, who was followed by his son Mang, who was followed by his son Xi, who was followed by his son Bu Jiang, who would later retire and pass the throne on to his brother Jiang. Jiang was followed by his son Jin. When Jin died, he would be followed by his cousin Kong Jia, who had been the son of Bu Jiang. Kong Jia had initially been passed up for the throne because he was very superstitious, and many considered him insane. After destroying the productivity of the Chinese by getting them obsessed with witches, local nobles deposed him and replaced him with his son Gao. Gao was followed by his son Fa, who was followed by his son Ji in 1728 BC. Ji was an infamous, corrupt tyrant who was addicted to sex and alcohol. Under the recommendations of one of his concubines, he created a large pool made of alcohol, which the nobles could swim in and have drunk orgies. The Xia dynasty's emperors exerted control under a passive approach, allowing nobles to continue to run their kingdoms as suzerains to the emperor. One of the most powerful of such kingdoms was the kingdom of Shang. King Tang of Shang organized his people into an army to rebel against the tyrannical and ineffective Emperor Ji, deposing him, ending the Xia dynasty, and beginning the Shang dynasty in 1638 BC. Tang's elder son Da Ding was supposed to succeed him, but preceded his father in death, so he was instead followed by his second son Bu Bing in 1629 BC. Bu Bing would serve 2 years before dying, being followed by his younger brother Zhong Ren. In 1627 BC, Zhong Ren would reign for 4 years until his passing away, and was followed up by his nephew Tai Jia, who was the son of Da Ding. Tai Jia died in 1611 BC and was followed by his elder son Wo Ding. Wo Ding died and was followed by his younger brother Tai Gang. Tai Gang died in 1567 BC and was followed by his elder son Xiao Jia, who then died in 1550 BC and was followed by his younger brother Yang Ji, who ruled until he died in 1538 BC, being followed by his younger brother Tai Wu, who was then followed by his elder son Zhang Ding. Zhang Ding died in 1452 BC and was followed by his younger brother Wai Ren, who was followed by his son He Dan Jia in 1437 BC, who was followed by his son Zhu Yi after his death in 1428 BC. Zhu Yi reigned until his death in 1409 BC and was followed by his elder son Zhu Xin, who died in 1393 BC and was followed by his younger brother Wo Jia, who never had any children. So when he died in 1638 BC, he was followed by his nephew Zhu Ding, who ruled until he died, being followed by his cousin Nan Gang, because his own son Yang Jia was too young. Nan Gang would die and be followed by Yang Jia in 1307 BC, who was in turn followed by his younger brother Pan Gang, who was followed by his younger brother Xiao Xin. Zhao Xin would only rule for 3 years, being followed by his younger brother Xiao Yi, who was followed by his son Wu Ding in 1249 BC. We know the series of kings of China during the early Shang dynasty because they began the practice of keeping royal records by etching them onto animal bones, which were retained at their regional capital near present-day Anyang. These bones, being the first physical record of Chinese history, are known as oracle bones for their significance. The oracle bones indicate that the reign of Wu Ding was a prosperous one, which he had led the Shang dynasty to expand its territory beyond the heartland and conquer neighboring peoples. Wu Ding died in 1191 BC and was followed by his elder son Zhu Gang, who was then followed by his younger brother Zhu Jia. Zhu Jia's elder son Lin Xin preceded him in death, so when he died in 1156 BC, he was followed by his younger son Gang Ding, who was subsequently followed by his son Wu Yi, who was followed by his son Wen Du Wing in 1112 BC. Wen Du Wing's reign began to see Shang power crumble as the tribe of Zhao began to rebel and encourage others to join them. Wen Du Wing died in 1101 BC and was followed by his son Di Yi, who was followed by his son Zhao, unrelated to the rebel tribe, in 1076 BC. Zhao built an extravagant palace for him and other nobles to drink and have orgies in, while the Zhou tribe that shared his name quickly conquered their territory. Coming closer and closer to the capital, when they reached the palace, Zhao locked himself in a room with all his jewels in gold and lit a large fire, committing suicide by burning himself to death in 1046 BC, marking the end of the Shang dynasty and the beginning of the Zhou dynasty. The Zhou army had been led by General Wu Jia, who crowned himself king. King Wu proclaimed the mandate of heaven, which said that the ruling king had power over all of earth, and he had that right given to him by God. Natural disasters were seen as punishments for bad leadership, and an overthrow of a king or dynasty was seen as an intervention by God to show his loss of approval. This idea created a long-running political tradition in Chinese culture around the right to rebel against an unjust or unsatisfactory government, which would lead to frequent cyclical periods of instability and regime change. From the mandate of heaven, a social hierarchy system called Fangjian was set up under Zhou rule. In addition to members of royalty, commoners or subjects were split into 4 categories. First, the scholar officials, who were subjects who took and passed a civil service exam, allowing them to work for the kingdom administration. They were joined by the peasant farmers, artisan craftsmen, and merchant traders. Fang Jian created a new system of 16 feudal states. Wu unfortunately died 4 years later and was followed by his son Chang in 1042 BC. Chang was too young to rule on his own, so his uncle, the Duke of Zhou, served as a powerful regent. Many of the dukes from the vassal tribes did not trust the Duke of Zhou, and 3 of the tribes, the Kai, Guan, and Huo, who were known as the Three Guards, rose up in the rebellion of the Three Guards, aligning themselves with Shang loyalists in the east. The Zhou loyalists decisively defeated the rebellion and consequently increased their direct control over the eastern tribes. Chang died in 1021 BC and was followed by his son Kang, who was in turn followed by his son Zhao in 978 BC. Now that Zhou control of the Central Plain had been solidified, King Zhao returned to the territory south of the Yangtze River, which was controlled by the Chu people, which was rich in minerals. He led the royal army into Chu territory, beginning the Zhou-Chu War, which would end in disaster, with the king being killed during a retreat in 957 BC. Zhao was then followed by his son Mu, who would lead a series of raids on the western Quanrong, a Tibetan people, leading to them developing a particular hatred of the Chinese. Mu died in 922 BC and was followed by his son Gong, who was followed by his son Yi, who was killed and deposed by his uncle Xiao in 892 BC, who himself was deposed and killed by Yi's son Yi. In 885 BC, Yi was followed by his son Li in 877 BC. Li was a corrupt king who lived a decadent lifestyle, which he raised taxes to pay for. The people revolted against his rule and exiled him in 841 BC and placed the Gonghe Regency in his place to govern, which would see power be shared between nobles. When King Li died in exile in 827 BC, his son Shuan became king and ruled until he died and was followed by his son Yu in 782 BC. Yu married Queen Jiang, but later divorced and exiled her so he could marry his beautiful concubine Bao Shi instead. This angered Jiang's father, the Marquis of Shen, who entered into an alliance with the Quanrong to attack and destroy the Zhou's capital in the west and kill King Yu. The nobles in rebellion then chose to install the Marquis's grandson Ping as king and move the capital of the Zhou dynasty east to where the present-day city of Luoyang sits, marking the end of what is known as the Western Zhou rule and beginning the Eastern Zhou rule in 771 BC. The Zhou dynasty would now be ruled by representatives of each of the 12 important vassal states who would intermittently come together in a conference to decide matters of national importance, meaning the power of the Zhou king was greatly reduced and now largely ceremonial, and the Fangjian feudal system was dismantled. It was the king's responsibility to pick a hegemon from among the 12 vassals, who was the most powerful, who would then pledge their army's protection to the weaker vassals. This system inadvertently caused a consolidation of power amongst the strongest vassal states, as instead of merely protecting their weaker neighbors, they absorbed them until there were 4 dominant states of Qin, Jin, Qi, and Chu, which could barely be called vassals anymore. One tiny state that existed within Chu territory was Lu, where a peculiar philosopher named Confucius lived. Confucius believed the leaders of the Zhou era were corrupt and cultureless, and that it was his responsibility to bring back the cultural richness that had been present in the earliest Xia and Shang dynasties. He would record his beliefs by writing them in 5 classics, which would serve the basis of the religion of Confucianism, or school of thought, depending on how you look at it, who his most ardent believers would turn to as scripture. Core tenets included the ideas of Hundun, which was the remnants of the original egg that encapsulated the universe and now existed as pure chaos, and the force of Qi, which is the life energy from Pangu, which now lives on through human consciousness. The chaos makes no sense to the limited human brain, but in reality, it is the delicate balance between the two forces of yin and yang which work to stabilize each other. These ideas were not originally Confucius's. He simply resurrected the lost tenets of Taoism. In 719 BC, when King Ping died, he was followed by his son Huan. At this point, Confucius would begin writing his final classic, which he called the Spring and Autumn Annals, which was a chronicle of the current historical period under Western Zhou rule through a philosophical lens focusing on the dichotomy of the seasons. After Confucius passed away, the people of Lu would continue his work on the Spring and Autumn Annals, updating it as the years progressed. The detailed coverage of this period is now known as the Spring and Autumn period. During one of the conferences of the vassal states, the Duke of Zhang felt that he had not received sufficient respect from the king and launched a surprise attack on him, even injuring the king himself when he was struck with an arrow. Although the Duke was defeated, this action showed the other vassals the true weakness of Zhou rule. King Huan died in 697 BC and was followed by his son Zhuang. During Zhuang's reign, there would be an assassination attempt on his life by various noblemen of the vassals. The attempt failed, but caused the king to further retreat from public life, beginning a period of strong rule by 5 hegemons, beginning with the death of the king in 682 BC. The first hegemon would see the Duke of Qi consolidate control. During the hegemony of Qi, a system of civil organization was created based on townships rather than the old feudal system. Qi was in power during the 3 consecutive reigns of King Shi, King Hui, and King Xiang. The Duke of Qi died in 643 BC, creating a power struggle amongst his sons and allowing the hegemony to pass on to the Duke of Song, who was allied with the King Xiang's brother and helped him expel the king from the capital. The king would forge an alliance with the Duke of Jin, who in 636 BC would kill the Duke of Song and regain control of the capital, reinstalling King Xiang and beginning the hegemony of Jin. In 628 BC, the Duke of Jin would die and the hegemony of Qin would begin through a marriage alliance. King Xiang died in 618 BC and was followed by his son Qing, who was followed by his son Quang in 613 BC. Aggression from the ever-expanding state of Chu to the south forced the new King Quang to choose Chu as the new hegemony. King Quang died in 606 BC and was followed by his younger brother Ding, who died in 586 BC and was followed by his son Jian. Around this time, the nearby Wu people who lived outside of Zhou cultural sphere and who the people of Zhou thought were barbarians began to increase in power and stage attacks on the kingdom. The state of Jin would send ambassadors to Wu, offering weapons in exchange for them to secretly attack Jin's historical rival of Chu. In 579 BC, the bickering vassals came together and made King Jian choose Jin as the new hegemony. The king's declaration did nothing to appease the situation, showing how far the influence of the position had fallen, and violence continued for the next several decades. Jian died in 572 BC and was followed by his son Ling, who was followed by his son Jing, who was followed by his son Dao in 520 BC. Dao would rule less than a year before being killed and overthrown by his brother Jing II. In 506 BC, Wu defeated Chu, and instead of submitting to Jin hegemony, decided to claim power for themselves. Wu control was tenuous, and in 482 BC, the king of Wu decided to call a conference in the Zhou capital, leaving the local capital of Wu unprotected, which allowed the Yu people, an ally of the badly damaged Chu, to attack and take control, beginning the hegemony of Yu. Both the hegemonies of the Wu and Yu were unrecognized, and this chaos began a civil war between the vassals, which saw Chu and its allies eventually defeat the state of Jin and demand it be partitioned to weaken its ever-expanding noble class. Jin was split into the separate states of Han, Wei, and Zhao. King Jing II died in 477 BC and was followed by his son Yuan. The chaos of the civil war engulfing the Zhou dynasty caused the state of Lu to finally cease in making updates to the annals of spring and autumn, bringing an end to the eponymous period.